It was definitely some hurtful comment or microaggression that I have been going through, and probably I have internalized that it took some time for me to kind of resolve in my journey. But I think that gave me a lot of like deep sense of empathy and compassion and passion to bring a real change for the people who come after me. That made me feel strongly about we need to double downing on inclusion work in order for us to unlock the true power of diversity of thought.
Well, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. I'm delighted to be here, delighted that you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Keiko Terasawa. And Jo is the head of Google's Inclusion and Equity program for the APAC region. So I'm like delighted to see you. How are you today, Jo? It feels like we talked about doing this like months ago, and finally we get to do it. So it's so great to see you. So and how are you and where are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much. And yeah, it feels like the ages, and I'm so pleased to be here finally with you to join the conversation. So I'm joining from Sydney, and my home office based in Sydney, and really happy to contribute to this amazing podcast.
Thank you so much. So maybe if we start with a little bit about you. So it sounds like an amazing job to have to be head of inclusion and equity for Google, such a huge company and such a big responsibility. But I'd love to know how you actually got to doing that role and doing what you do today. What is your journey? I'd love to hear a little bit about your backstory.
Wonderful, thank you. So I've been at Google for 11 years,
Wow.
which is a long time. And in being in this role for 4 full years, I'm actually the first person who took this role in APAC region. So before me, there was nothing. We had a kind of different structure to support diversity. And I always kind of, being passionate about diversity and equity inclusion, and especially in the area of inclusion. And I don't know if you've heard about 20% project at Google, that you can dedicate your 20% of your time for your passion project. And diversity, equity, inclusion is always my, area of passion, being as a HR professional. So the prior to taking this as an opportunity to transfer in, I have already anyway working on DEI from where I used to sit. And so it was really natural, the transition into the role. And before joining Google, I was in the HR consulting kind of firm. And so I'm really kind of get excited about a little bit like chaotic kind of, playing ground or kind of blank canvas kind of moment to get to work on, drawing the vision and creating what it could happen if we do really, really well. So that kind of attracted me a lot. And of course, a little bit about me. I'm Japanese. I'm born and raised in Japan, coming from the rural area of like western part of Japan. I've been to the public school education, K to 12. English is my third language after, standard Japanese and my local dialect. So, and I self-learned English because my, the public school teachers, none of the English teacher was fluent in English. So as you can imagine, like that's like a long time ago, right? Before internet. It took me like 2 weeks or plus to access to anything English written material. So I think, the having access to information is super resonating with me, and I can see the kind of the equity gap in relation to information access, based on my personal experience. So that's something I was really passionate about, and then I think that experience, and then also in the context of Asian family, I'm the said daughter of three girls and the last one. And it's what it means is actually like it's I, the day I was born, it was a disappointment for my family because you're expected to have a boy somehow, right? And then while I was so loved by my family and, that my father was my biggest advocate, but he still get a lot of the comments around like how wasteful he was in deciding to invest in my higher level education. He was the one who kind of after so much argument and a kind of negotiation, he eventually supported me to, go to study in Tokyo. And after that, I moved to the UK to study postgraduate. And now with my own family, I live in Australia. I'm actually the first person in my entire family who speak English and also moved to, outside of their hometown even. Yeah, so I think it's it's in a sense it's innate to kind of being expected. There's no expectation of me, right? Growing up and kind of feeling that's why is that kind of staying curious, and it was definitely some hurtful comment or microaggression that I have been going through, and probably I have internalized that it took some time for me to kind of resolve in my journey. But I think that gave me a lot of like deep sense of empathy and compassion and passion to bring a real change for the people who come after me. Yeah, so that's where I'm kind of coming from. And so it's really natural for me to see, especially after joining into Google, that definitely 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I didn't feel like I belonged because obviously I'm not elite background. My English may not sounds like, professional in the context of like, I'm corporate America. So I felt like, and I probably kind of intuitively knew what impact of lack of sense of belonging would make people's performance, right? Because you feel less confident and you feel like you may not be considered as the strong performer, etc. So I feel like that made me feel strongly feel about there's we need to double downing on inclusion work in order for us to make unlock the true power of diversity of thought. So that's where I kind of getting into, and fast forward 4 years later, my team has kind of grown more than double. And I think thinking about that, 4 years journey, I'm just like really fascinating to see the level of interest and engagement from the leadership and then also as well as the grassroots level through employee resource group that I support. It is just fascinating. And I think APAC region is a place where we can unlock the power of diversity really, really well, because we are already diverse, and the kind of sense of respect is a part of our DNA, right? Because of the Asian culture, or we kind of see each other's kind of very subtle nuance and try to understand where they're coming from. That sort of kind of sense of kind of thoughtfulness really help us to unlock the when we try to work on the inclusion and equity work. So I feel very excited and blessed to be able to work on inclusion and equity space in this particular region.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, thank you, Jo, for sharing that with me. I can really understand why you're so passionate. I mean, often those passions come from our personal experience, and now being in a position where you can influence so many people at Google, which is wonderful. So I'd love to know the types of initiatives. So when you look at an inclusion program, and I can see your passion is inclusion, belonging, and if you look after those things and get those things right, then diversity comes, well-being comes, all of those things come on the back of that. But if you're feeling excluded and you don't belong, then of course everything gets impacted in a negative way. So from your point of view, in your role, and you described how the team has changed and you've got a very diverse population in terms of APAC, but some of the things that you would be working on a day-to-day basis, what are the types of programs? I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, but I'd love to know the types of things that you would work on, that you would drive to create a more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive culture within Google.
Sure. There's a quite diverse area that we get to cover, which is very fortunate. One of the key kind of client group that we serve is what we call the employee resource group. So that's basically the volunteer-based kind of employee group of the representing different demographics within Google. So I think a lot of organization now has those like ERGs. Sometimes they call it business resource group, ERG, whatever you call it. Essentially, it is about creating a safe space for a specific demographic employees, and then have internal network for them to kind of exchange information, as well as kind of help each other to grow in their career, as well as kind of that's where we also kind of provide inclusion program targeting for the specific demographic in terms of for their well-being, as well as kind of the self-development and growth kind of the situation. The ERG is not just only for the affinity group. Affinity group means that those who are coming from that specific demographic. So for what women at is the ERG group for women at Google. But men can definitely join, and that we do have a leadership, right? The male and non-binary folks are standing up as a leadership of women at group, because either as allies or men as allies, and non-binary, and also like the trans folks also, like if they are identified as a woman, it's for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, we do have disability alliance for people with disability, or someone who are passionate about product accessibility, and we do have Pride Art and Trans Art for LGBTQI community, and so on and so on. So we do, so for those people, it's driven by the employee, but whenever they come up with the program they want to drive, our role is to support them to align their strategy into the right direction, so that it's impactful, in line with our APAC-wide diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, which is aligned with our global DEI strategy. So that in terms of the harnessing the energy to direct for them to directing it into the right direction is something we do as a core role. And we also looking at the gaps of like inclusion experience within the demographic. We also try to create a program that is focusing on the specific the groups. For example, women in tech community. It's very well known especially in tech industry, the women in technical roles are very underrepresented yet, right? To date. And what it means in this region is often if the organization is kind of structured according to the product area, they may be, right, just like one of the very few women within their team. Then they may feel extremely isolated without having, if they don't have a proactive kind of networking opportunity or feel connected and feel supported in their overarching, career development at Google. So we kind of created the virtual summit for those demographic, and we do also have a heritage moment, right? So the February was Black History Month, March was International Women's Day, or the Women's History Month. and so on and so on. So we do have like, specific kind of moment for each demographic to kind of, help and support to raise awareness to allies in terms of what it means for what this Heritage Month means for them, or the significance of their historical context. Yeah, so we do that as well. And then we also, strive to stand up, strive for Google to stand up as the lead learner. If not, if we can do well better, we can do better than maybe like thought leader eventually in tech industry in DEI. So in order for us to kind of do that, I also kind of continue constantly kind of finding the opportunity for Google to stand strongly to within the market. So for example, we have been running a pilot program called the DigiPivot in India. This is a kind of the program, reskilling training program for external talent who are women in mid-career who wants to kind of pivot their career into digital marketing. So by doing that, we may not be hiring all of them, but it is about we as a corporation, responsibility to, to address the root cause of the challenge that we face in terms of the representation, so that we can, use our resources to extend the extra support for those, the form communities, so that they can thrive into their careers in the digital, in the technology, tech industry. So these are the aspects. So internal ERG support and specific programs, and also sometimes like, Heritage Month moment. And then externally, we do also, design and implement the pilot programs, DEI programs in partnership with external DEI firm and kind of academia. And, these are all kind of the led by and owned by leaders, business leaders. So these are the things that we kind of work within the region.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I mean, it feels, I can see why you're really busy. How many, so there's an internal role and then there's an external role, and the internal role, how many employees do you have working at Google APAC?
Oh, that's not something we can't, I don't think I can answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I can say it out. Yeah. So, but I can talk about, we are in the hyper growth mode.
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah.
Okay. Let's just kind of stop so I can edit. Okay. So when you think about your role and all of the people and the responsibility and where you are in the kind of cycle at Google, I'd love to know how you manage that, because Google's, I'm assuming, growing. But if you can speak anything to the phase of development, because Google, I think what's really interesting about Google, just from an external point of view and a customer point of view, as I am, is that you have a view of what Google was like, say, 5 years ago, but of course it keeps changing, and you've worked for Google now for 11 years. So I think it's very interesting how, what the perception is that people have, whereas the reality, because we all, like, you work for a brand that everyone knows, but some people will still think of Google as a search engine, others will think about it as a, based on the product and based on our experience. But how do you manage, I think there are two questions I'd love your input on. How do you manage in terms of that constant change, in terms of growth and development within the business? And also, I'd love your views about how, what people can do to create inclusion, belonging within the context of hybrid working, and where we are now, and everyone's facing the same challenge. How do you create an inclusive and a sense of belonging where people may not actually be able to meet physically in the way they did in the past? So a couple of points there I'd love for you to speak on.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's funny you say that. So 11 years is a long time, and I might have, just being an insider, might not be aware of like people's change, like from external perspective, how they see us as a brand, but from internal perspective, I see Google when I joined, like the it's a long time ago, in a small office in Shibuya. It was more like everybody knew each other. It was like the brilliantly smart people, yet like really kind of the strong vibe of startup, and the everyone has this can-do attitude, like why not, like we try to make like the strong belief in the changing the world to the better place, and which that notion of like can-do attitude and positive kind of the positivity around like contribute to the world through technology is still very strong as a part of the culture. And I think regardless, like the hyper growth that we have seen, especially in this region in the past couple of years, but what it means in terms of the culture, I had an opportunity to kind of join the internal event as a speaker, and into the organization where they literally had this hyper growth where majority of the people who joined Google joined it virtually, have never actually visited any of the office or met their manager or team member in person. And that made me kind of put myself in a realization moment of that my experience of Google might have been massively different from the majority of the Googlers who recently joined. I had the opportunity to kind of do a little bit of like tech check, like we have an internal tool to check like how many how many percentage of employees full-time employees joined after you kind of tool. And I saw 92%
Wow.
time employees join after me globally. So obviously my perception of Google may be very different from, especially for those who recently like joined in the past 2.5 years. So kind of it's really important for me to kind of think about those people who have this virtual experience of like getting onboarded at Google, and what is the what kind of impact it had, that experience bring to them when it comes to the sense of belonging. So yeah, so that's definitely something that we keep in mind. And so that is not just as our job as a DEI team, but also like as a one HR organization. We call ourselves a people operations, so one people ops kind of work that we have the new employee onboarding team. They are really focusing on virtual experiences. Then they do also kind of really try to think about, equitable experience. So far, I've been kind of hearing a lot of positive kind of, the feedback. Yet, of course, after kind of settling into the organization, and yet not being able to see people in person, or that's kind of kicking in maybe like afterwards, right? So how to stay engaged with your team members or your clients to make sure that they feel supported and kind of the be given opportunity to thrive is something really important. So the hybrid work, so when we talk about the daily work, equity in terms of our daily operation, making sure, especially now some of us are getting back to the office in some location, and some of us may have decided to stay completely remote. Some of us may be going back and forth depending on the pandemic situation. So definitely this year and onward, people's experience of getting to work will vary, right? Then how are we going to ensure like optimal experience for everybody? And the key thing is to kind of call for thoughtfulness, and kind of the empathy and compassion, like to think about others and kind of trying to make the equitable kind of ground for everybody. And in order for us to do that at Google, I think we are really kind of, looking at our corporate value, which kind of define our culture. So we are very fortunate to have our, the corporate culture of three respect. So it's respect users, to respect opportunity, and respect each other. And the third part, respect each other, is really key for us when it comes to the work environment, because we never be good to anybody externally if we can't respect each other and create the kind of the inclusive work environment where everyone feel seen and supported and connected, so that they can contribute to bring the innovation.
I love that. And looking specifically, just moving on and just looking specifically at the APAC region, what are the differences that people should consider when thinking about creating diversity, inclusion, and belonging? Like you said at the start, that you've already got a lot of diversity, but maybe more emphasis on that inclusion, because you do have so many different languages, cultures, ways of thinking. It can feel very challenging to bring all of that together. But I'd love your view on that.
Yeah, and it is something that I work on daily basis and continue thinking about what would be the best way to do it. So the key philosophy that I always go to is think globally, act locally, which is not Google specific. I think there are a lot of organizations who are the operating as a global organization and kind of have a business as a local in the local market. Always need to think about that perspective, right? So how to have a global wide strategy, and then when we implement it into it, and then how can that strategy and actual tactics resonate with the local market and local audience. So I do that same. And and another dimension that I also think about is because it's people, and how Google operates is that we mobilize our talent globally, right? So when we talk about specific market in Asia Pacific, we are not just talking about locally hired people. There are, as a global organization, there are people across different parts of the world happen to be working in a specific location who may carry, the different cultural background, different expectation with them when moving into this region. So the two things I keep in mind is one, how to make sure our DEI narrative and kind of approach is resonating with our local talent, so it's not perceived as a US centric kind of the conversation, because it's not. But at the same time, second point is how can we then make sure that Google's experience is consistent across the world, regardless where you're working from, for the people who are moving across the world. So taking one example of racial equity, right? That's a big topic, and that's relatively new concept into this region. When we talk about, racial equity, we do have a global racial equity committee as an organization. This is fundamentally kind of focusing on Black plus talent, and then which might not be right the great representation in the region, right? We might not have like large part of our employees kind of coming from that demographic. Having said that, so we do have, right, we as a global organization, we want to make sure that our experience, regardless where they work from, is consistent and consistently inclusive, so that they can thrive and grow and stay within the organization. So we need to think from that perspective, but at the same time, we also want to think about, like, as an additional lens of what the racial equity means in the specific market in the region. So taking Australia as an example, reconciliation action plan is something really important for us to kind of work on in Australia, which might not be very well known or obvious agenda when, for people outside of APAC or even Australia market. So my part of the job is not just from making sure that the global strategy is landing well to the local context, but the vice versa as well. So if there is any like big agenda that is critical for us as a business to achieve, how am I going to be then advocate for that? That to be elevated as a critical agenda when it comes to DEI, as a the global organization. So that's like a little bit bottom up advocacy part is also I need to be conscious and I need to work on. And in order for me to do that across 13 different markets, it is a constant learning and educating myself. Right. Yeah. So that's never be a dull moment.
I'm sure.
It excites me, and yeah, I'm so grateful to be able to connect with different great talent, right? That is diverse, and have a trust base for them to be able to give me a really honest kind of feedback on what can be done better or what is not working, or when it works really well, then they can also tell me that. So that trust-based kind of network and community base that we get to have in this region is something that I really embrace.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, last question, and I'd love, and this is very much your perspective, but I'd love to. Everything you've said, there's a lot of activity, sounds great, sounds wonderful. What does success look like? Like if organization, it's not necessarily Google, but every organization, so if every organization is successfully has a inclusion and equity program in place, how do they know that it's working? What does success look like for you? Like, how do we know whether we're doing a good job in terms of ensuring that we do have initiatives in place, or we have the culture in place that really supports diversity, inclusion, and belonging?
Sure. Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge believer in belonging. So it means that for everyone to bring a bigger business impact through, innovation, right? So it is more than be a sum of ourselves, like some of them headcount. So it is kind of, we are nurturing ourselves by a psychological safe, trust-based workplace. So there's more innovation, there's more greater work that can be done that can be much more than what I can do as an individual, what other can do as an individual. So it's like it's amplifying the business impact. So that is what I'm kind of ultimately aiming for. So what it means in the more kind of actual kind of tangible way is that they need to feel like seen for their performance, and they feel connected to each other in terms of the network, and they feel supported for their career development. Therefore, overall, they feel proud to be Google or any other organization. So that's the if it's a kind of ultimate stake, and then that's, to me, it is a kind of foundation of everything we do, right? If you have that, the foundational kind of needs fulfilled, that's where you can start growing of your, self-actualization and, the self-awareness and kind of, the higher level of growth can be achieved as an individual as well as an organization. So that's the kind of foundation that we are trying to achieve.
I love that. I really love that. That is so aligned with the whole finding equilibrium philosophy.
Yeah.
And before we close, I mean, I tend to ask everybody the same question, but and maybe instead of asking you what finding equilibrium means to you, because I think in some ways you've just answered that. But what do you do to keep yourself in balance, to keep yourself well? Because you've clearly got a lot of different balls in the air, but how do you maintain that sense of balance in your own personal life?
Yes, and then the longer I work on this role as 100% responsibility, the stronger I feel that knowing what make you feel grounded and stay well is the skill that you really need to have as a professional. And for me, and I think it was more kind of, it's been more than a decade that I started, but um, I do grow vegetables, and
Oh, amazing.
I think it's like really, I guess I'm not just a people person, but I'm just like fascinated by the growth, right? In any kind of forms. So by growing things, whether it's kids or like vegetables or plants or people, I learn a lot, and it does force you to do a couple of things. One is observation. So you need to really observe what's going on in that little seed to kind of pop up, and then kind of really wanted to understand what it needs to be fed, and what kind of sunlight it has to have, etc. And then the second thing it teach me is a patient. And you need to stay engaged, and without getting frustrated not to see the fruit for quite some time. In fact, one big reminder for me, everything I feel stuck at work, that try to kind of be grounded from through my hobby, is you actually need longer to grow your root before seeing the flower or fruit. So the fruit that you're going to kind of the cultivating is like really end result, and it's a kind of it's the very end result. But if you think about the whole kind of lifespan of one plant or one vegetable, it actually takes, like, you need to start creating the soil, right? Not even like planting a seed. So it's a long journey. So
Mm,
I try to remember that. And it actually, I learned permaculture. So it also kind of give me a lot of perspective when it comes to diversity. Like, true power of diversity require time. And also, before we unlock that, there's a lot of like chaos happening. Like, you have a lot of bugs coming in or eating like all the vegetables, etc. So that whole kind of the permacultural philosophy helped me to do my job in a sense.
it's
You know, so yeah, I think it's just kind of it helping me to kind of have a higher level perspective. That's the sad part. Whenever I do anything, I try to keep my perspective at a higher level, not going into the, I don't know, ground or kind of how do you go, like, negative space or kind of competitive space, or I would say like more ego based space. So whenever and it's, the being able to notice your mood change is really critical. And then when you notice that, how can I then moving myself up higher here, so that I can kind of stay a higher perspective without losing my mission, and kind of, without losing why part of,
I love that.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's how I try. Not perfect every day, of course, but
No,
yeah, that's how I try to stay grounded.
I want that is wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I think a couple of things for me really come out of what you said. It's like you can't have the fruit until you do the work, because often we want the end result. But if you want to grow something, then of course it takes time and you have to do all that work. So there's so much that we can learn from that kind of natural nature cycle, really, isn't there? It's so interesting. I'd love to talk to you more about permaculture, but we'll have to talk about that another time. And I think the other point you make is that it's getting the balance right, isn't it, between living your life and observing your life. And it's similar to what we say about working in your business versus on your business. And, ultimately, and having mechanisms and tools in place so that you can do that, so that you've got that perspective, because it helps you know, like when you step back and you've got more of a bird's eye view, then you can see whether you're heading down the wrong road, or, or whether there's a brick wall coming. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. And thank you so much for spending time with us today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Let me acknowledge you for like everything you've done. It really is an amazing story. And just moving from where you came from and really having that passion for knowledge and really being able to transform and change your life so that you're here now and can really impact so many other lives, it is an amazing thing. So thank you so much for everything you do and for sharing some of your story and some of your tips with us today. Where can people find out more about you or follow your work?
Sure. If they could find me on LinkedIn, that would be the easiest. I'm also trying to launch my personal website outside of my work to kind of continue sharing through that channel. Once it's kind of launched, it's going to be connected on LinkedIn. So if they can follow and connect on LinkedIn, that would be the easiest.
Amazing. Well, Jo, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you everyone for your time and for your attention. And we will see you next time. Thank you.